joining. Just to give you some quick insight, yeah, Nick Nicoludis, as I was introduced. I'm currently in Australia, so it is currently really early in the morning, I guess is the best way to put it. So I apologize in advance. I've just had the lights actually turn off on me, so I'm just going to swing my arms and turn them back on. So I will try and be as I guess as interactive as possible, but please feel free to take down any questions as well and ask as I present. But what I'll start doing now is I'll share my screen. So I'll hit share and I can share my desktop. Great. And I will now. So I've given a different perspective of this, and welcome to my talk. I'm looking at this as an enterprise software approach, and I guess everything that I state in this presentation are my personal views. So feel free to question or ask any questions afterwards. And to be quite honest, it's an area that I keep changing and adapting to because there's so much, I guess, development at this point in time. Anytime I believe something is better or best, there's something else comes along which surprised me even more. So I've developed a bit of an agenda, and I hope it's something which people will enjoy. And I've tried to cater for both starters and people who are a bit more advanced in that development world. So hopefully this will cover everyone that's currently listening to this presentation. I first have to start off with a definition because I believe I'd like to provide my definition of what generative AI is. And then one of the first and most important things when it comes down to enterprise generative AI is responsible AI. We'll talk about a few of the key topics around responsible AI. And this is really important, mainly because we're using data, we're using information. We want to make sure the data is, it's been trained using ethical approaches. And there's a few other items which I'll talk about during that part of the presentation. But for us, I think one of the key things I really want to kind of provide or mention is the use of responsible AI, especially in the enterprise. We'll have a look at a term called prompt engineering. So it's the way we actually put the prompts together to generate, I guess, some insights. So again, just using your normal tools, and always a good way to start to get your first understanding in how to start developing for prompt engineering. And then I'll have a look at some generative AI tools. So some tools that I've used and how to play with. And then I'll end off with the risks. So cover some of the risks that you should really think about when you start developing your solution. So hopefully, this gives you a holistic view of I guess, generating generative AI solutions and what we currently think of before we go ahead and provide generative AI offerings to the market. So first thing I want to do is talk about the definition of generative AI, and what you'll notice is every single I guess image that I've kind of embedded as part of my agenda slides has been used using generative AI. In this instance, I used Copilot, the Microsoft tool, and I asked it to give me a definition of presenting on generative AI, and it presented this image. I reckon it looks pretty cool. And so, these are some of the little things I like to do to kind of, I guess, utilize generative AI as well as provide it in my content. So what is generative AI? So again, I know a lot of people who have joined this call might already know, but I mean, my view of this is that generative AI is a subset of deep learning. It involves training a model to generate new data that's similar to training data that has been given. And it can be used to create all kinds of things. Everything's from creating bits of text to music to to images to videos to entire worlds and other applications. So we're really kind of starting to explore what generative AI can do for us. And there are a lot of different things which it's being used for at the moment, including all the things that I've mentioned above. And for me, it's a very exciting area. Especially since we're already starting to use it in some enterprise applications. And I'll talk a little bit about that moving forward, but there's definitely, it definitely created a lot of buzz. And just to give a bit of insight, of where it started, I think the ChatGPT really in December 2022 when it was released, excited a lot of people. A lot of people jumped on. And then, within the first, 5 days, 100 million users were using it. So it gives you the insight into how exciting it is and what people are possibly using now. That was back then. Now, if we have a look at the generative AI world, um, and I've used this, there's a website, there's a link there. I'm pretty sure we can make the materials available after this presentation. But if you go there, there is currently so many different generative AI solutions that are available, and it keeps growing. And this list, and what will happen, and what's starting to happen slowly is consolidations, and companies that I guess are competing against other companies. So it will simplify over time, but for now, there's a plethora of different solutions being developed out there, and use different sites. I mean, I've put this site down as a way to view what's currently happening in the world, but there are many, many out there. So if you feel like you need to generate a model, or you want to work on a generative AI solution that someone else hasn't, please jump on this page, check to see that someone hasn't already built it, and maybe even have a look at what they've done and see how you can improve it. So there's already a lot of investment happening in the generative AI space. But with all these tools and everything, one thing we need to do is make sure that things are being generated accordingly, and generated, using ethical standards. So I actually asked, in this instance, I asked Stable Diffusion to generate responsible AI. And I'm not sure if this image demonstrates responsibility, but obviously they've got an image of a robot with certain text to tell us what we need to do. And what I've actually done is I've provided a few steps, or a few keywords. With the software vendor we work with, mostly, or where I work with when I'm here with PwC, I work with SAP, and they have the 3 Rs: reliable, responsible, and ready. One of the areas where I think we could have a look at in a bit more detail, and what I like to look at, is things like data and fairness. Make sure that the data we have is of the right, and I'll go into a little bit more about what that means. Security and privacy. This is really key, especially if you're working in areas like Europe. There can be some really serious implications if you don't follow those certain protocols. Reliability and safety. Um, Again, this is another key term, because as it's generating, I guess, different pieces, we need to make sure safety, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and coding practices for responsible AI. So what do I mean by data and fairness? Data quality and bias: scrutinize your training data for biases. And the reason being, there has been a paper that was released, it was last year, and it was with the earlier versions of ChatGPT, but there was someone queried, generate some code which will identify the best user, or the best kind of employee to execute a specific task. And the code it generated was code that said, if the employee equals white, and the employee equals, of this descent, then you should use, that's going to be your best option, which again, that introduces bias. So there's these little biases that might be in the data, which you need to be mindful of. So always check to see if the AI has been trained, what data has been trained of. Algorithmic fairness: make sure you implement algorithms that minimize bias, ensure the right outcomes. And the other thing, which it was actually really big for a while, and I think it's coming back, but the whole ability to be able to understand what the AI is doing, explainability and transparency. Um, there was a big push for something called explainable AI, and it's still in place, because most of these AI models that are developed are big black boxes. Um, what we want to do is minimize the amount of unknowns that gets generated. So having a way to quickly explain, and the way your model generates its output is really key. So especially in the enterprise world, because especially if you talk about customer data and some of the other things, it's really important to know what happens. We want to make sure that security is in place. So if it generates code, make sure that all the code doesn't have any holes, doesn't have any possible, any possible data breach, any way for people to hack in. These are key things that we need to know when we're using generative AI to support us in this coding world. Make sure that we're using techniques like anonymization and safeguarding for using data, even things like obfuscation, making sure we obfuscate certain details so it's not visible. And then obviously abide by privacy regulations. Now, again, depending on which country you're based in, certain countries have certain regulations, requiring that data must stay in its sovereign state. So in other words, cannot leave the country. So these are all things that you need to take into consideration, and especially when you're using generative AI cloud solutions. If you're pushing data out to the cloud, realize that you're possibly, moving data to a place which can possibly get accessed by someone else. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. Give users control over their data and explain how AI systems using it. So again, having this key thing around security and privacy. Make sure that actually I think I've got another one in there. Coding practices. Make sure we use libraries and tools that leverage existing libraries. So things that have been fairly already checked, already analyzed, that's already available. Document your code, clearly document and make sure everything is available for you. Now, one thing I'll do is later on when I start showing you some of the tools, some of these new tools will help you actually create the documentation. And again, it's to me, that's when it comes down to developer productivity is unbelievable, because that was one of the things I think developers dislike the most, having to generate documentation. And I know we're working on tools where it will allow us to generate the documentation to make it easier for you. And also involve other experts in ethics, fairness, because they might provide a different view on everything, make sure that everything you're using is according to standard. Now I'm going to shift a bit. So we talked about the responsible AI. Now we have a look at prompt engineering. And again, here's another image generated by GenCraft. And I asked for it, visualize prompt engineering for me. And it's generated a very interesting image. I'm not sure if I look at that as prompt engineering, but that's what it gave me. And I asked for it in a cartoon form. So that's why it looks a bit cartoony. So when it comes down to prompt engineering, it's basically prompt engineering is a way you structure your sentence to get a result from a particular, I guess, generative AI solution. Um, and moving forward, listening to other experts, prompt engineering is possibly going to be the way we'll be developing software moving forward. Previously we had to learn about, and still now, there's still people learning different languages, different structures, to be able, and basically humans had to learn how to code for the machines. With generative AI and the prompt engineering approach, we're using human language to generate the code to then, to create our solution. So the whole idea is that, we have certain things. We have like a subject, a specific task or instructions you'd like the model to perform. Plurals, external information or additional context that can steer the model into the right direction. Weights, input or question that we are interested in to find a response, and an output indicator. And now there's several different, I guess, approaches here that I've got here on the right, which shows, and what I'll do is I'll go through a few of them and I'll use some of the out of the box solutions to demonstrate some of the outputs of what happens when you can, or when you ask certain prompt engineering questions. So one of the first things I decided to do was test, this one is just using, this is actually using Google Bard. And I said, I gave it the prompt, as you can see above, classify the text into neutral, negative, or positive. I say text and give it the text, and, semicolon, it knows, okay, here we go. I think the vocation is okay. Then I ask for sentiment, and it asks, and then I'm asking the generative AI to give me the sentiment. And it actually gives me a pretty good answer, pretty detailed. Um, it says, it's fine, so average, good. So it's actually done a pretty good job in understanding, and this is single shot, right? So zero shot, the ability to just give it one statement and then get a response back. So this one, especially using Google Bard, gives a pretty definitive answer. Then we go into few-shot, and this is where we start giving it a few examples of data and then ask for an answer. Now, I decided to use both ChatGPT and Google Bard on this one, and I've found some really interesting results. So what you can see here is I've trained it. I've said, these are the odd numbers, and said here's the answer. The odd numbers in this group add up to an even number, which is true. The odd numbers, and I say true, false. Now I trick it, and I say the odd numbers in this group add up to even numbers, right? And if you go, well, 15 plus 32. Okay, yeah, and plus 5 plus 13 plus and you realize actually that's not going to end up right. And it's actually the answer is actually false, but ChatGPT, because it doesn't have so much context and understanding of the arithmetic, it came back with true. I actually then grabbed Google Bard and asked the same question, and it came back actually with the right result, which is the first question is false. So it's pretty interesting. It shows you and it gives you a breakdown and explains the results and provides some more detail. So again, here I've used two generative AI solutions and I've got two different results. In this instance, ChatGPT is 0 and Google Bard is 1. But then, I decided, well, let's change this a bit more. How about if I ask something which isn't as easy to try and understand? And I, for myself, being an executive, one of the things we have to do is play golf. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to ask it about golf? And I put the question, part of golf is trying to get a higher point total than others, yes or no? Now, Google Bard actually responded with yes. And now for those people who know golf, golf is about actually having the lowest score, right? You want to get less strokes to hit the most amount of balls. So actually in this instance, Google Bard didn't do as well. Where then if I jump into the second part, where we used ChatGPT, it actually came back, with the right answer, which is no, the statement is incorrect. In golf, the objective is to have to a lower score, total points. Anyway, it gives you the right answer. So it just shows, again, where Google might have been right in that last question, ChatGPT is actually right in this one. So again, depending on which model you have, you might want to use, the different or the right kind of solution moving forward. Again, I think I've explained that one. But rather than having to go through and try and identify and try and find the right model to do your specific need in your particular domain, I've actually saw there was this recent paper that was released, and it uses, I guess, the different models, Bard, ChatGPT, and Claude.ai from AWS. And it kind of given you some recommendations based on how will they score depending on which domain. So there's people already doing this R&D. So rather than having to go through and test to see which one, and look, I always recommend doing your own testing, but there's people who've already done it, and there's the access to the paper yourself. So if you want to go to this into a bit of detail, jump on that paper and have a view of the comparison. Now let's have a look at some of the generative AI tools that's possibly out there which we can utilize. One of the big ones, I started playing with when I first started having a look is a platform called Hugging Face. I'll go into a bit more detail about Hugging Face, but for me, that's a great platform for starting off and finding different models and different data and different information. Copilot on GitHub, again, a great tool. I'll go into just a one pager into that one. Amazon CodeWhisperer, another interesting tool which will help you generate code. Now, again, I have one slide as explaining both those solutions. But what I've decided to do is actually with Codium.io, I've actually set it up in my Visual Studio environment and I'll actually walk through an example. So hopefully we can have a look at that in real time and see some of the things you can do with Codium.io. And I'll explain a bit what Codium is. Amazon Q, I also decided to use a low code environment, and that one's really good and really interesting, and you'll see through my example. And then also talk a little bit, because if I'm talking about enterprise software, there's some big enterprise players out there. I mean, SAP is one, one of the largest business providers. I'll explain how they're going to be adopting generative AI moving forward as well. And you'll see with them, actually, it's quite interesting what they've done and their vision moving forward. So what is Hugging Face? Hugging Face is like it's a hub, it's a platform, and it's got over 350 models. So lots of the latest and greatest models that are out there, that are the NLP models, which you can use. You can actually jump onto Hugging Face to be able to access. They've got lots of data sets. So if you need sample data to test anything, there's a heap of data sets there. There's demo apps and spaces which you can play with. It's all open source and publicly available. There's a collaboration platform, and it's also like a collaboration environment. So you can basically go there with your colleagues, play, and be able to access this there. So Hugging Face is a great company. Investors include SAP, IBM, Amazon, and there's a huge number of other investors that have gone into Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is definitely a platform which a lot of big organizations are using to access that kind of data. Copilot, again, Copilot's a great solution. Obviously, with Microsoft being built into GitHub as well, it allows you to do things like code completions. Allows you different chats, so you can chat and ask it to generate code. It has, common language interface assistance up to level 3, so you can do a lot of things. Security vulnerability filter to make sure that there's no kind of holes or gaps in your code. Code referencing, public code filter, IP indemnity, and enterprise-grade security and privacy. There's some papers and everything. I'll also add the link to this slide. So if people want to have a look at this in a bit more detail, there's a lot of research behind it and what they're doing actually at Copilot to move forward. Bedrock is a similar tool, and again, developed by the AWS team. It helps with basically creating the boilerplate and repetitive code patterns, and it's a great bit of tool because it gives you the ability to write secure applications. Again, it does this whole security review, can generate entire functions and code, and put in snippets. All you have to do is chat, and it will help generate for you. Accelerate, I guess, for anyone who's new, it can help you with that. It can also work between different, IDEs as well. So it's a good little tool. I haven't used it myself, but we will be using it soon on another project. So this is something which a tool which we're going to use. But what I decided to use was I decided to use an open source tool, which everyone can play with. Um, Now this is a fairly new tool. It's Codium.ai. It's now saying now they've got something called Alpha Codium as well. So it's actually using Alpha Code 2 to help generate the code. I've been really impressed with what I can do, and maybe what I'll do is I'll quickly, rather than I guess talking about what it can do, let's have a look at what it can actually do. So I'm going to quickly um, get out of my presentation. So let me just minimize that. Minimize. And this is actually this is a bit of code I used. I generated my own RAG or retrieval and generative solution using Rust, right? And what you can do, and I haven't added anything to it, but I can actually start to add things using the generative AI tool. So I do have Codium installed, and what you can see is on top here, it's giving me some insights, right? So I can actually go to Codium options, and what I can do is if I hit Codium options, this out of the way. Test, it can generate a test, explain. So I'm going to hit explain. And what you can see it does is it's actually calling out to Codium. It's reading the file and it's going to explain what my main.rust code does here. Now, depending on your internet connection, be fast or slow, but most of the times it's pretty quick, and it can help you generate, I guess, again, the code comments rather than having to do it yourself. So it's generating that based on the code that's in Visual Studio Code. It can work with other IDEs as well, and it's basically pretty quick in the way it's able to do it. So it will come up with something any second now, hopefully. It's pulling information, obviously, not only from here because this calls out other other information. So hopefully generates. I did test it earlier today and it did work for me. So I'm hoping it's although I have to admit earlier today in Australia is probably when everyone was sleeping. Oh, there we go. Um, and there you go. It's just generated some information which I can now use to either populate documentation or move it forward. The other things it will do, if I needed to, if I want to make my code look nicer, I can actually ask to beautify my code. And now what it's doing is it's parsing it. This will probably take a little bit. This will be a lot faster because beautifying things doesn't take as long. And the nice thing, actually, one thing that I really like is not only does it beautify, it creates the beautification, and then it allows you to choose whether you want to accept it or not. Um, um, and so what I can do now is I can say show diff, and it shows me, if we make some changes, what it recommends making the changes, rather than having to keep things. So it's actually just, if I want to say apply changes, it will now clean up my code. Actually, I'll just say apply changes because I do like it looking prettier. So apply changes. So now my code looks a lot prettier than what it did before, a lot easier to read, a lot of other things. Uh, so if I go back up here we go. Can also generate, it will generate the document string, so what parameters I can pass in and what it can generate. And it can also make improvements. So, if you've written code and you think actually there can be better ways to do it, I will, it will basically make those recommendations on how to better improve your code moving forward. So it's actually a really, really cool tool like that. And again, at this point in time, it's free, and used a lot by the open source community. So it's a pretty cool little tool to use. So it's doing some refactoring. Okay, it's giving me all the different. Now it's made all the recommendations. Improve error handling by replacing unwrap. Um, so it gives me some code examples. I won't go through this now, but it just shows you like all the different things. So these are some of the things that are now coming into coding, which will make our life a lot easier, and especially for those people out there who need to develop code, and have to do these things. This will make your life, as I said, significantly better than what it was before. So let me go back to my slides. Hopefully that gives you some good insight into what this tool can do. I'll bring up my set up full screen. I really enjoyed having a bit of a play with this. This is Amazon Q. Now most people can access this at the moment. I look at it as a bit of a RAG engine, so it helps kind of put together a whole lot of data and environments really quickly. And what I'm actually going to do again, I've got another demo. This is a demo which I built just to demonstrate how easy it is to use this tool. And I'll probably show you a few things as I do that. So let me go out of the presentation again. Now this is all in a browser. Now, I guess this is the solution itself. So it's a generative AI solution, and I can ask it certain questions. What I've done is I've pre-trained it or given it documentations around SAP S/4HANA migration. Um, and what I can do is ask, let's say, for example, if I want to ask, what are the benefits of, what are the new key features around master? So I'll ask, what are the new key features uh, on master, make sure I spell it right, master data governance. I wonder, actually, I didn't say SAP or S4. I'm hoping it will pull that, because the documents I've given it are based on SAP. There you go. It has generated what I wanted. And the nice thing here is it tells you where it's grabbed it from. So here I've got, I've given it a whole lot of PDFs, which you can train it from. So actually what I'll quickly do is I'll just quickly, I'll show you a bit of the, so we're currently in a preview mode. What we can do is we can go back in. You can simply modify like title, subtitle, the message, and what we can do is we can go back into, here we go, the PwC SAP expert. Hopefully my lights aren't going to go on me again. And here are the different ways we can actually connect to it. So we can, I've basically uploaded files, so that's how I've added, and we can simply say add data source. And yeah, you can add different things. You can add data from your cloud buckets, from a URL, from a web crawler. These are and that's why it's almost like a drag and drop approach to be able to quickly generate a RAG solution on here. And it's got different connectors to different kind of environments and areas as well. And that's all I did. I simply connected it to those different areas. And then to run it, you've just got to hit preview the web experience. And then I've provided obviously a message and we can take it from there. So I guess the other things I can, hold it, cancel. Well, let's just move that in. So these are other things like other questions that I've asked, and that can come back up. So then I can pull it up. Now this is really important. So for anyone who's having to implement some new systems, what are the benefits? What happens when you do it? This is what you can quickly generate a I guess a chatbot or interactive chatbot, which allows you to talk with documentation to then generate the results you need. So for me, I think these are really good. These are simplified. This requires minimal, I guess, development background, minimal generative AI background. But what it does, it generates a bit of code for you, which hopefully you can use. So hopefully that's been something of interest, and hopefully people can have a bit of a play if you're new to this world and want to be able to start doing a basic generative AI application. You want to show your boss, I attended a course yesterday. Jump on Amazon Q and simply just follow the steps. It's really easy to do. Play. And the good thing is it's got different connectors and it's all secure in environment. So that's one of the nice things as well. But now, I guess from my world, and this is the kind of world where I'm working in at the moment, is the generative AI solution in the SAP world, and that's really the enterprise space. SAP are going to releasing their own tool called Joule. Joule is basically a co-pilot to the SAP environment. So you can ask it questions around HR, you can ask it questions. That's where it's actually going to start with its solution called Success Factors, which is in human resources. So you can quickly ask, what's my leave balance? I would like to take leave. Certain questions, and it'll be able to do that. Now, Joule, interestingly enough, is developed on IBM Watson. SAP has partnered with IBM to develop that specific tool, and SAP have something called the Business Technology Platform, and they're using that because there's this term in the SAP world called Clean Core, which is basically they want to remove all the customizations from the core and keep it in the cloud and keep it outside. So the Business Technology Platform is that extension. They've got a lot of things in there. They've got integration services. They've got user experience services. They've got data services with their HANA database. One of the new areas, if they had AI Foundation, they've had it for a while, but now they've got something called the GenAI Hub. And the GenAI Hub is really like the plugin or the proxy to the generative AI solutions that they're working with. So when they first mentioned they're going to be working with generative AI, obviously OpenAI and ChatGPT was the first one. Anthropic and Cohere were pretty much at the same time. And then there's another German company called 𝗹𝗶𝗿. And the reason I think they've also partnered with 𝗹𝗶𝗿 in this instance is because 𝗹𝗶𝗿 will allow them to have like an on-premise edition. And the reason why that's important in this enterprise space is because privacy, data concerns, some organizations still want the ability to keep their data within their own data centers, so don't want to live in data centers. So the whole data sovereignty is a big piece. So that's why they'll also offer that option. But again, they're working with the hyperscalers, AWS, Google, Microsoft. There's that they'll work with all of them, and they're actually cloud agnostic. So the good thing is that when in the SAP world, if you're already being trained on a specific, sorry, just getting my lights back on. If it's already been trained on a particular um, or you're already deployed on a particular cloud environment, you can use a generative AI technology in that moving forward. However, with all this, there are risks, right? And that's why I actually asked the Wombu generative AI solution to generate an image around risks. Now, I don't believe it looks too risky. This image looks too risky, but this is what it produced for me. Um, and really, what are the risks? And again, these are things that I brought up before. Unintended bias in data. Sometimes we don't know how it's been trained, what information it has there, and we've got to be very careful. And so, one of the things one of the things we recommend is, we don't necessarily automate the tasks. We want to automate the tasks. We don't want to automate the decisions. So make sure that, get the data that's being pulled in. Sure, we can automate that, but finally make the decisions have to be overlooked by a human to make sure it's there's no issues moving forward. This is a really big one, and I'm not sure how this will be solved in the near future, but intellectual property and plagiarism. The models which we've talked about, and especially some of the big ones, have been used using public data. The challenge is that there must be some real or there are some real challenges at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, around plagiarism, theft of intellectual property, and there's a lot of that discussion at the moment. So we've got to be careful where the data is being sourced from. We've also got to be careful we don't become too dependent on it. We don't trust generative AI too much, because that can also lead to some bad results. Security vulnerabilities. There might be some vulnerabilities that we are unaware within the generative AI solution. And again, what's called data governance and sovereignty, making sure data it keeps its structure within this right place, and available. But this is where we have like all the information, how we can try and evaluate it and make sure all the economical impacts are broadly rolled out, and also we protect people's intellectual property moving forward. But to have a look at where it has, and again, you'll get a copy of the slides, and all these have got links. Interestingly enough, I know I was speaking to a few people last week, and they were talking about how they were using generative AI to help train generative AI. Now, there's this really interesting paper called "Self-Consuming Generative AI Models Go Mad," and what they demonstrated in this paper, it was really, really interesting. When they started training the models on synthetic data, it was okay the first iteration, it was okay the second iteration. By fourth and fifth iteration, it started doing some really wacky things. Like it started, I'm not sure, it's probably not as clear on here, but there's some really weird, like there's like I think almost like a hand coming out of this girl's mouth, certain scars on this person. And it started doing weird things. So the synthetic data that starts doing some strange things. So that's after like 5 iteratives. Anyway, there's a lot more detail in that paper. So if you're looking at using generative AI to train generative AI, realize, or even with synthetic data, realize that there might be challenges moving forward. There's a few other good papers, so challenges and applications of large language models. So what other things have they've identified? The whole idea of hallucinations. That's probably a topic I probably haven't spent enough time talking about at the moment, but generative AI, if it doesn't necessarily know the right answer, it might actually make up an answer, and that's where it's kind of a bit dangerous. And I'll talk about that, I guess, in the second part here, where we talk about the legal side of things, and why Johnny can't prompt how non-AI experts try and fail to design LLM prompts. So again, your ability to produce something from generative AI really depends on how well you prompt. Hopefully, I've given you some basic structure on prompt engineering, but that will definitely play a big role in the quality of your results moving forward. There was an amazing case in the US where a lawyer decided to use generative AI to present a case, and what actually happened is the generative AI made up a lot of the cases, some of the information, and then the judge went through and identified it. And basically, yeah, this legal firm got into a lot of trouble because, as I mentioned, generative AI will start hallucinating and creating false things. And so you've got to be really mindful. Whatever it generates, double check just to be sure. Um, there's a few lawsuits out at the moment against Google and some of the other players because obviously they trained it off publicly available data and so they didn't necessarily ask people's authorization for it. There's also big lawsuits out on some of the other ones, Midjourney and Stability AI. And obviously the IP, there was the whole artists big issue that they had in the US, and that will still continue. There's still a lot of people currently, challenging generative AI and what it produces. The final point is actually the cost of generative AI. It is really, really, expensive. And obviously they made this statement last year where they're saying, OpenAI might go bankrupt. That was prior, I guess, to the Microsoft acquisition. But to run things, I mean, back then it was $700,000 every day. I imagine today it'd probably be more than double because the amount of people that are on the platform. Generative AI uses a lot of computing resources, a lot of a lot of specified chips, NVIDIA chips most likely, and it really is quite expensive. So you've got to really understand the total cost when using generative AI. Other things as well, I know when I listened or I read the article on this, so big AI needs to overcome high scaling costs. Solutions like Copilot, actually, Copilot for GitHub, they charge enterprise user $39 a month, and apparently it costs Microsoft $79 a month, right? So, luckily Microsoft's a company that can probably take that differential, but a lot of small companies wouldn't be able to. So recognize the costs of using some of these. And then there's also, what are the large cost of language models and generative AI pricing? Different places will charge per token or per word or whatever. So just be really careful to review your legal documentation when you're signing up for a generative AI solution. But out of all that, I found this quote and I found it really interesting, and I thought it's probably one of the best ways. I mean, there was an older quote, there's another quote which I used in another presentation around Prometheus and fire and giving it to the humans, but I found this one was one actually from someone here in Australia, someone who works for the Australian Tax Office. And his statement says, we've got to be ultra careful, treat our data like uranium, and ensure we've got those ethical principles in place. And to me, this was a real powerful message because if you think about it, if we don't put the right governance and the right items in place, who knows what generative AI will do or what recommendations it will make. And this is where we start seeing these dystopian futures of where machines take control because we've given them control. And so we've got to always keep these governance in place. And there's this term which I always used in academia and I still like to use now called human in the loop. We must always have the human in there making the final decisions so we can ensure that the solutions we generate won't destroy us, won't kill us, won't cause any challenges and are not biased. So I've kind of reached my hour, but I hope that was of interest to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will go over to Q&A now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. That was such a great, insightful presentation. We can take up the questions now on chat box. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave your questions on the chat box. We might also be getting some questions on our live. So we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So I'll just check with my team if we have any questions there. I believe the lecture has been very clear as mentioned by 𝘆𝚹. I believe it's 𝘆𝚹. So
Thank you, Kasai. Yep. No other questions. I hope, yeah, look, as I said, I hope I made it nice and easy for people to understand,
yes,
um, and hopefully get started as well. So,
of course. And you can always get in touch with Nicholas as well. I believe we have shared his LinkedIn link on the chat box. So you can always get in touch with him as well. I have a question from our live viewers. So I'll just read it out here.
mhm.
How can AI technology be used to improve software testing and quality assurance processes? So this is a question asked by one of our live viewers.
Yeah, one of the examples, and I didn't actually show you, and I'm possibly happy to show you now. Generative AI, especially with tools like Codium, it 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 actually will generate the test cases for you. It's really quite incredible. Rather than having to sit there and write these test cases. So let me go into here, and I'll go in here. Well, let me move this out of the way. Um, Test. And so it will generate all the test cases I need, right, and really simplify my job. To me, this is amazing. And don't get me wrong, it will generate tests. As I mentioned before, human in the loop. Make sure you still need testers to make sure that what the tests it generates are still there. But what this will do is make testers' jobs a lot easier because it will help you, generate all the test cases and move things forward. So for me, generative AI in that space is really good. Um, we've also been developing a solution called Data Steward, the PwC Data Steward, and actually using generative AI to make sure the data is of the right structure and right quality. And again, it's going to improve the need for, it's going to simplify the use of the data admin, because the generative AI will help you clean and filter that data as well. So these tools are all coming out now. They're still evolving, but I really think it will make testers and data admins' life a lot easier by generating code and performing some of those tasks for you. I hope that was a good enough question. All right, Ganser. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. I believe that was good for the one who asked. Also, if anyone has missed out on any of the part, we will be uploading the recording of the session on our YouTube channel, so you can check it there as well. Here's a question by Vishnu. So he is asking, what are the security aspects that can be taken care of while using generative AI? Would you like to answer that, Nicholas?
Yeah, sure. Look, generative AI can also perform like a code analysis. And so what it will do, it will look at the code structure, look at common coding vulnerabilities, and it will be able to make recommendations on how you can patch that. So even doing things like if people put passwords in the coding, or put in login and information, it will be able to pick up and say, you need to resolve this. So generative AI will really help around making recommendations for people on their code and how to remove common security vulnerabilities to make your, I guess, the code more secure and less vulnerable to hacking. So, yep. Hope- hope-
Yes, I do believe we can start depending on generative AI for our security as well. Hopefully, that won't cause another future apocalypse or such.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so I got another question here from one of our live viewers. It says, "How can we manage AI software development?" Pretty straightforward question here.
Yeah, look, again, managing your AI software development, it's all about having like all your key, your key principles in place. Make sure like there's these things called AI ops or ML ops as well. So everything from using a standard repository, so using things like Hugging Face, and then being able to then provide it in a code repository. I mean, GitHub's probably the most popular one, but you don't have to use that. Be able to use it, and then making sure your AI models that you do develop or do generate have been tested on ethical and source data. Um, Actually, one interesting thing I found, I went to Hugging Face earlier, and they've also got this whole responsible AI site, and I asked which models are responsible AI, and actually it didn't show up any, which I found really interesting. So just be mindful again when you're setting things up, which models you use and which ones you take from the internet and what they've been tested against. And if you don't have that information, make sure you do thorough testing for what you need to do before you start using it in production, because yeah, it could have some negative ramifications if it produces something that yeah is not desired by the customer.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Nicholas. I see a question here, very interesting question by Bushan. He asks, how can we tackle problems like misuse of Gen AI, like generation of fake images or documents as part of responsible AI? I see that people have been facing a lot of these dupe images, so I feel like we have to focus more on ethical hacking and such. So, what's your point on that?
100% agree. And what I think there are some recommendations I've seen is that for people who generate that software, and again, assuming these people are ethical, they put like a signature or fingerprint in the image so you can identify that it's a fake, a deep fake or a fake. But that is going to be a real problem moving forward. Actually, and I know this sounds actually funny because it only happened like today or yesterday. Twitter actually stopped queries on Taylor Swift because people had put deepfake images and deepfakes on Twitter, and it was obviously big fans of Taylor Swift were getting really upset, and so they had to stop that whole thing. So um, you've got to be really careful. I mean, for those who generate this stuff, put in signatures and things to make sure that people can know it's generative AI, or what's called it's been produced by generative AI. Um, and look, I think we're still learning on how to get better on this. I truly believe there's no bullet answer. I mean, I know I've seen things where people say, "Oh, you could tell if you zoom in on certain pixels and everything," but certain things if you're not an expert, you won't necessarily pick up on it. So yeah, I believe it's our responsibility as people who develop generative AI solutions to be able to say, yep, this is a synthesized result, and then put it out in public. But I think that's a very good and still I think a very challenging question for many organizations moving forward. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Hopefully, we see a very good solution to that in the soon future.
Yeah.
Um, Another question here, can generative AI be applied to malware detection?
Yeah, it can because the way it reads through files and everything can identify if there's any malware. So I think you'll see some of the most I guess malware detective solutions using it to help generate or look for patterns in the mal or look for patterns which malware produces. So yes, definitely there's going to be a lot more of that, and that's going to improve that space I think a lot better. Yeah.
All right. I have another question here by one of our live viewers. He's
Mhm.
asking, Gen AI has a cost both in terms of money and environmental footprint. Still, companies are dying to implement it and scale it. In this context, is it possible to find an equilibrium between the cost, carbon footprint, and increased performance?
Look, that's another wonderful question. It is it's funny because I read an article the other day. So some of the big firms who were producing cryptocurrency, because that was the other one that had a big ESG footprint, are now moving across to generative AI. Um, Look, that's still I still think we are still miles away from it being let's say a green or sustainable solution. Um, but I think, like anything, it was interesting because I listened to a podcast today, and he explained it. When the first computers were built, they were the size of rooms. They were massive, and they consumed so much energy and power. And now, his iPhone is like 1,000 times more powerful than that computer at this point in time, and it uses like a quarter of the things. This will keep evolving as things keep evolving, it will become more affordable. But I think it's a valuable question, and we should do more. We should provide more reporting on the environmental costs. And I know I brought it up in my little tag there regarding the financial cost of running these generative AI solutions, because they are quite resource intensive, especially the larger language models, which I think I read, I think to train um, ChatGPT 3.5 costs like over $3.5 million in resources. So I'd hate to know what ChatGPT 4 cost. They're still quite expensive, and that's why we really need to perform that evaluation. So I think that's a good question, and it's something that needs to be thought of more.
Yes. Well, I have a question here on AI healthcare. I'm not sure if you would be interested in, but I'll just read it out. It says, how much of a precision-based AI healthcare is going to be powered by the piezoelectricity from the human body using IEEE Bluetooth standard 802.15.4, zero point 5, and zero point 0.6?
Oh, that I'm not too sure on that one. That seems more like
Hmm.
a technology focused one rather than a generative AI one.
Right,
So yeah, I'll say I'm not sure on that particular
right.
question. Well, yeah.
No worries. We can skip this question. Whoever asked this question, please do leave us a message on our LinkedIn, wherever you can connect with us, and definitely we'll get back to you with this. Um, so I do have another healthcare question, but I'll just skip over that and go with a question here by Kosai. Sorry for pronouncing it wrong. So he says, if you can give an advice to public sector that try to use Gen AI or make their own models. And also he adds, are you okay with the use of local Gen AI like Freedom GPT or LM Studio? Any concerns on that?
No, look, I highly advise that moving forward, especially if you're using public sector. Public sector has government data, government citizen data. Citizen data, should stay within, you know, very secure environments. I know some of the big hyperscalers have these, what they call sovereign data centers now, or secure enclaves. So they actually keep the data within the country. But no, I think it's fine to be using your own LLMs and developing your own LLMs moving forward, and especially because personally, I feel, you know, this whole idea of having, yeah, what's called general intelligence, so having the ChatGPT be able to answer any questions, I think is um, unreasonable. I think what we'll start seeing, and what we're starting to see already now, is we'll have certain models specialized in different areas. So, for example, there's a solution I know we're using at PwC called 𝘆cie.ai, and 𝘆cie.ai is used for contracts, and there's special legal terminology. So it's really good at going through legal contracts, identifying key terms and key things moving forward. I think the same will probably happen with public sector. If there's certain terminology and items used in public sector, public sector or the governments or countries will start generating their own LLMs to look after their own kind of policies and regulations because it's been trained specifically towards that. And I believe each country should have its own ability to train based on its policy and regulation as well. So it's not all centralized. And I totally support, I guess, any independent um, I guess or solutions available for generative AI as well.
Great. I just got noticed that we have a lot of live viewers. We had a last minute link some problem on the last minute, but we have a lot of live viewers, almost over 100 plus. So you'd be
Okay.
happy to know that on social. So that's why we're getting a lot of questions. But we do have a limited time, but we'll still stay connected after the session as well. So just to save some time, we'll take a last question here and then we'll move on to the gamification session. So yeah, the last question here is from another live viewer. He asked how to use Gen AI for regression model.
For regression, okay, is it regression testing or regret? I'm going to assume it's for regression testing,
Mm-hmm.
and look, that's a really interesting area to make sure, obviously as you kind of update things to be able to make sure your code backwards will work with backwards things. Generative AI can, as I mentioned before, these tools here. I mean, in this instance, I was using Codium, but you can actually ask it to generate regression tests as well. So to me, that's a really exciting space because I know I used to spend a lot of time having it for different versions, different things to be able to push in. But generative AI, depending on the tool that you use, will have the ability to generate the regression testing for you to be able to test. So it's backwards compatible as well. So yeah, really interesting stuff.